Chapter 4, Berkeley or Bust. A few days after I introduced the girls to Michael, we packed up his two-door Geostorm with our gear and hit the road. No one could get comfortable or stretch their legs out, but we could have been riding in the trunk and it wouldn't have mattered. It was exhilarating not knowing what was going to happen. I just met these girls a month earlier, and Berkeley, California was 2,500 miles away. An hour after we left, the car started to have its first set of many mechanical problems. Right when we got to Kerrville, Texas, we noticed something wrong with the tire. We had just ate some pot brownies, so we were all dazed and confused trying to figure out what was going on. Kerrville is a small town where Michael and I were born, but we hadn't been back since we were little kids. We pulled over to a back road on the outskirts of town, and Lisa and Elizabeth sat on top of the car while Michael and I wrestled the tire off. An hour later, a new four-door pickup drove by and the girls waved it down. It was an elderly couple driving around the back roads of the upper Guadalupe River. They were happy to help and offered to take us to the new Kerrville Walmart to fix our flat tire and bent rim. When we got there, everyone spread out in separate directions while the old couple waited for us in their trunk. Michael rolled the tire to the auto section, Lisa went in search of a Sailor Moon coloring book, and Elizabeth went to try on new bikinis. I was wandering around nowhere in particular when the lights suddenly went off. Their emergencies kicked in a second later, but the normally highly fluorescent Walmart had turned into a dimly lit warehouse. A few of its shoppers acted like it was the most exciting thing ever to happen in Kerrville. The old couple apologized for their Walmart's electrical problems and promised to make it up to us with sandwiches at their house. They said they'd show us the prettiest part of the Guadalupe River. The girls and I decided to go, but Michael stayed with the tire, wanting to be first in line when the power came back on. Their sandwiches sucked, but they took us to a part of the Guadalupe River which none of us had seen before. It had crystal clear water that flowed over the smooth, shallow rocks going in between our toes. It wasn't a busy tourist spot, just a few families waiting in the picturesque river on a warm afternoon. I felt proud to be from Kerrville. The car was ready at dusk, and we said goodbye to the old couple. Lisa promised to send them a postcard from the San Francisco Zoo. We squeezed back into Michael's car and got back on I-10 West. A few hours later, it got dark, the radio reception wore off, and everyone got quiet. Michael drove steadily down the access road running parallel to the highway while static calmly came out of the speakers. Elizabeth sat up front and stared out the window while Lisa and I made out in the back seat. Michael finally decided to stop the car a few miles east of El Paso. He pulled us down a bumpy side road and up the side of a mountain. The car shook violently and woke everyone up. Then he drove us up a steep incline down a pitch-black trail that he'd never been on before. He finally stopped on what felt like the edge of a cliff. Every few minutes, we'd hear a loud truck that shake the car like an earthquake. The next morning, we all woke up at the same time to a purple hummingbird. It flew in through my open window and danced around the inside of the car, giving each of us a greeting by gently flicking a few inches from our sleepy faces. You could sleep in your car every night for 1,000 years and never see something like that. Legends say hummingbirds float free of time. They hover around the universe and teach us to savor each person and every moment. It made us feel protected, like God was watching us. We smoked a bowl of strong marijuana. Lisa popped in Blondie's Atomic on cassette tape. Elizabeth made everyone sandwiches, and Michael hit the gas with his mind on making good time. Everything was chill at first, but when we got to New Mexico, the air conditioning broke and we all began to smell something horrible. The honeymoon was over, and it was clear just how difficult this trip was going to be. We could have used a motel, but Elizabeth was paying for everything, and the rest of us only had about $50. For the next 1,000 miles, each of us picked a window to hold our heads out to avoid one another's stench. Elizabeth refused to get a room, so we continued driving west during the day and being homeless and sleeping in Michael's parked car on the side of the freeway at night. When we finally got to Bakersfield, the car wigged out, so we stopped at a 7-Eleven. Elizabeth said she'd use her credit card to fix it, but Michael had to promise to pay her back. We called a mechanic shop a few blocks from where we were at, and they sent a driver to pick us up. When we got to the shop, the mechanic said he couldn't fix our car until morning. He was a young surfer type who kept hitting on Lisa and Elizabeth. We hung around his shop for a few hours until we got bored and decided to walk aimlessly around Bakersfield. Some wannabe gangsters tried to rob us, and Michael and I almost had to kick their ass. We hurried back to the 7-Eleven gas station to try and figure things out. We stood in front of the store yelling at each other until an elderly black man pulled up in a Cadillac. He got out of his car and immediately calmed us down. Despite being dressed like a pimp, you could tell he was a good guy. He suggested taking us to the homeless shelter he worked at, acting like they'd fix everything. I sat in the back of the 1980s Cadillac with the girls while Michael sat shotgun. Looking out the window, I laughed. I was on my way to a homeless shelter with my twin brother and two rich white girls in a restored classic Cadillac Seville. The shelter's employees treated us like celebrities. We weren't your typical looking homeless people, far from it, and they wanted to make a good impression. People get tired of looking at the same sad faces every day. That's true everywhere. The staff gave us specific instructions on how their shelter worked. After they explained every little thing, the head of the female homeless people took Lisa and Elizabeth to the women's area, and Michael and I were shown to the men's. Everyone got cleaned up and met in the cafeteria for dinner. The girls were thrilled the food was vegan. The hot meal and warm shower couldn't have come at a better time for our road-weary souls. Nobody enjoys their life when they're sleeping at rest stops and living off PB&J. After dinner, everyone was herded like cattle into an outside courtyard. It would have been okay if it was just Michael and me. We could take care of ourselves, but I felt responsible for Lisa and Elizabeth too. They acted like carefree kids at summer camp and didn't notice the old men drooling over their half-clad 18-year-old bodies. These weren't the type of girls you take to a homeless shelter, and there are very few realities where either of them would ever end up in one. These are the type of babes you find on a college campus, not bunking with druggies and felons who just got out of San Quentin and Sing Sing for rape and murder. After dinner, I tried to convince my crew to bail, but nobody wanted to leave after the warm welcome we got. Chapel service was after dinner, but they made sure everyone understood that it wasn't mandatory. Lisa was an agnostic, Elizabeth was rebelling against her Christian parents, and I was too young and stupid to know what the heck I was. Michael went for the sole reason that they had cookies. Most of that night's crowd decided not to go. This upset the Bible thumpers that ran the joint, so everyone that didn't attend services was brought into another fenced area that looked like a prison yard. I felt like I was going to get shanked. I was relieved when I found out they separated men and women at lights out. Men greatly outnumbered women here, just like they do at every homeless shelter. So Lisa, Elizabeth, and the rest of the women were put in a nest at the top of the bleachers in the gym where everyone slept. The next morning, at breakfast, I convinced the girls that a group of convicts were plotting to sneak up the stairs and attack them in the middle of the night. They got freaked out enough where they agreed to come with me to find somewhere else to stay until the car got fixed. We ate a big breakfast, then we set off to find an abandoned camp spot, an empty garage, or a park bench to crash under. After a long walk, we ended up in a quiet park in a nice neighborhood. The girls got frisky, and Lisa started braiding my chest hair. Elizabeth got jealous and ran inside a hospital nearby. We gave her a few minutes before finding her in the cafeteria sobbing over a half-eaten piece of cherry pie. "What do you guys want?" she said, staring sadly down at her plate, pushing a cherry around with her fork. Lisa sat down in the chair next to Elizabeth, put her arm around her, and said, "We came for you. We were worried about you." Elizabeth looked up, gave each of us a one-over, then looked at Michael and said, "Even you, Michael? You were worried too? Were you looking for me?" "Of course he was worried. We were all worried," Lisa answered. "Michael's the one who suggested we look in the cafeteria," I said. Michael had already begun eating the rest of her pie, looked up from the plate, and coldly stated, "I suggested that because I'm hungry." Elizabeth scowled at Michael, so Lisa and I jumped in and said, "He's kidding, he's kidding." "Elizabeth, you're part of this group," she said. "Yeah, we wouldn't be here without her." "Yeah, we wouldn't be here without you," I told her. Elizabeth looked at me with disdain and scowled. "You're just saying that because I'm paying for everything." We hung out in the hospital until it got dark. Elizabeth started to feel better, and before you knew it, we were all laughing and getting along again. It was fun and games until it got dark. Nobody had any better idea, so I suggested we go back to the park where we were at earlier. It was a park like most other parks, a patch of grass surrounded by wealthy homes and a few expensive apartments that qualify as low-income housing. This particular park didn't have any trees. They would have taken up too much space. So the four of us squeezed under a picnic table, lit a joint, and tried to share a blanket. After the joint, it didn't take long for a game of footsie to break out. After footsie, the girls began tickling Michael and me. It was nice until the cops got there. The first thing we saw was their flashlights. Whenever you're surprised by cops at night, the first thing you always see is the light from their flashlights. Michael and I jumped, and the officers immediately started yelling in a typical cop tone. "Get your hands out of your pockets! Hurry up!" Their manner turned when they saw the two pretty girls. "Why, hello," they said to Lisa and Elizabeth. I stashed our half-burnt joint while the cops drooled over the girls, putting on the rest of their clothes. They asked a few questions and we tried to answer honestly, but the last thing these Mayberry deputies wanted to hear was that we'd driven across the country for no particular reason besides the fact that Berkeley sounds cool. "What are you guys, some sort of tree huggers?" they asked. They ran our names and everyone came back clean. We figured they'd tell us not to sleep in the park and let us go. but instead they told us to stick around, they'd help us get a room. They called our supervisor, and he showed up a few minutes later with two coupons, one for a free motel room and one for a free pizza. They said it was against policy to drive us there, and the city bus wasn't running that late, so they pulled out a map and showed us how to walk there. It was a nice trek taken by four happy kids. The room had cable TV, air conditioning, and two comfy beds. We ordered a large vegetarian with extra cheese and watched the original Titanic film on Turner Classic Movies while each of us took turns using the phone. The girls called their parents and told them they were okay. Michael and I tried calling mom, but Guy hung up the phone before she got there. After such a comfortable night, I was surprised how quickly things turned the next day. But with no car and nothing to do, people got upset. We left the room, hit the street, and within seconds everyone was ripping each other's throat out, yelling and cursing. The mechanic was a common enemy, so I tried to pivot our anger toward him. It's nobody's fault, I told everyone. The car should be fixed. We should be in Berkeley by now. He's right, Elizabeth said. That creep just wants to keep us here. We were naive kids being taken advantage of by a small town scummy mechanic. The only thing wrong with the car was a serpentine belt, which should have taken about 10 minutes to fix. We didn't know anyone in Bakersfield, and we couldn't leave without our car, so the guy was basically holding us hostage. Elizabeth called him from a payphone and asked what was taking so long. He wanted her to come to his house so they could talk it over, but she wasn't going anywhere without the rest of us. He hesitated for a minute before finally inviting all of us to his house. I was surprised the mechanic lived in a nice place, but his parents were probably on vacation. The four of us sat on his couch while I told him about staying in a homeless shelter, a public park, and a motel paid for by the local police. You could tell he didn't like Michael or me. Taking these girls to a shelter, he said? You should be ashamed. Well, we wouldn't have had to if our car was fixed, I told him. The mechanic said we could stay the night, but Michael and I had to sleep in the garage while Lisa and Elizabeth were invited to sleep inside, probably in his bedroom. The five of us got drunk in the living room before he pushed me and Michael in the garage. There was a strange vibe in the house the next morning while we sat on the couch. The mechanic suggested we all take showers. I'm assuming he wanted the girls to wash any trace of his semen off their bodies. When I got out, I went back in the living room. Michael had gone outside and the mechanic was sitting on the couch in the middle of Lisa and Elizabeth. Dude was wearing a tacky pink surfer tank top and had his bristly arms and hairy pits wrapped about my two female friends. Lisa scooted away, looked up at me, and said, "Sorry." They acted like I was supposed to be upset. Lisa tried to move down the couch, but the mechanic yanked her arm and pulled her back under his pit. She growled, jumped off the couch, grabbed me and Elizabeth by our wrists, and dragged us to the front yard. We walked over to Michael, who was sitting peacefully Indian style in the driveway, and sat down next to him, forming a circle. Nobody said anything for a minute until Lisa yelled out, "Fuck Bakersfield." For the rest of the day, we walked around town waiting for our car. When we got back, it was supposedly fixed, but before the mechanic gave us the keys, he made one last attempt to convince the girls to ditch Michael and me and stay with him at his parents' house. Lisa wanted nothing to do with the tool, but Elizabeth considered it for a second. We finally got on the road heading out of Bakersfield, but only made it about 20 miles before the car started to have the same exact problem that we paid the mechanic to fix. We broke down at a fast food place in a town that reeked like cow shit. As soon as the car stopped moving, a swarm of mosquitoes ditched their shit patties for our young bodies. We were hungry, sunburned, and sick of Central California. Elizabeth said she'd call the mechanic from a payphone. Lisa, Michael, and I ate French fries while Elizabeth yelled at the mechanic through a payphone. It was like she was finally coming out of her mousy shell. I don't know what she told him, but whatever it was, he got the mechanic to send one of his cronies to come fix the car for free. We congratulated Elizabeth on her assertiveness. Her tentative nature had been driving the three of us crazy for most of the trip. To see her stand up for something important invigorated our crew. While we waited for the mechanic's goon, I kept my troop in good spirits by writing a story about our adventure on a picnic table near the restaurant. Covering the graffiti that was already there, I described what we'd gone through and everyone signed our names. When the mechanic's friend finally got there, he fixed our car in 30 minutes. We got back on the road and Michael noticed he didn't have power steering. It took him a while to get used to it, but it wouldn't have mattered if the car was on fire. We were getting out of that town. Nobody said much on the drive. Lisa felt cold. She claimed nothing happened between her and the mechanic. We pulled over a few hours later and everyone went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up to Michael punching me in the arm because he found out I told Lisa and Elizabeth he pinched their weed. A long-haired country guy appeared out of nowhere and broke up the fight. After everyone caught their breath, the stranger lit a joint and pulled the trained show dog out of the trunk of his Subaru, a collie named Dahlia. The guy's name was JD. He was a 30-year-old country type from deep in the Appalachian Mountains. He had a southern accent and was missing one of his front teeth. This was highly noticeable because all of his other teeth were straight and in normal condition. JD had long, silky brown hair, but because of a disease that caused him to lack any other hair on his face or body, this was his only hair. He didn't have any eyebrows or eyelashes, and the guy basically looked like a freak. JD had been traveling the country for a couple years with his dog in the worn down station wagon his grandfather bought him. He worked odd jobs and made money selling drugs. The dog was his only companion and went everywhere he went. After JD smoked us out, Michael and I stopped fighting and we got back on the road. Everyone thought this was the last we'd hear from JD, but later we'd find out that he'd actually been following us for miles, becoming quite infatuated, a stalker at a distance, with our girl Elizabeth. Okay, that was